Bob Dylan's reputation as a towering figure of modern music is, to put it charitably, one of the most overinflated myths in contemporary cultural history. His disciples, ever eager to position him as the authentic voice of protest and artistic integrity, conveniently ignore the fact that much of Dylan's oeuvre rests not on originality, but on the appropriation, sometimes blatant, sometimes legally dubious, of the work of others. To those who lionize him as the conscience of his era, it seems worth pointing out that this genius has often relied upon the labor and traditions of musicians who were, in the truest sense, keepers of the flame. Take, for instance, the case of Masters of War, one of Dylan's early anthems, ostensibly brimming with righteous indignation against the architects of Cold War militarism. The song's melody is not the result of Dylan's own creative ingenuity, but rather a transparent lift from the traditional ballad Not a Moontown, which he most certainly encountered in his immersion into the American folk revival. The particular arrangement Dylan appropriated was traced to none other than Gene Ritchie, a musician whose family had preserved the song for generations. Ritchie's connection to this music was not casual or opportunistic. It was deeply rooted in her Appalachian heritage, a lineage she protected as carefully as Dylan exploited it. When Dylan's plagiarism came to light, the resolution was not a moment of introspection for the self-styled prophet of truth and justice. Instead, his lawyers made the problem go away with a meager settlement of $5,000. One imagines this sum, trivial even then, was considered by Dylan's camp as the cost of doing business. Ritchie, for her part, stood as a dignified reminder of the folk tradition Dylan so thoroughly mined, one of many unsung heroes who maintained the oral histories and melodies that Dylan repackaged for mass consumption. And yet, this incident is not an isolated one in Dylan's career. His early work, in particular, is riddled with instances of borrowing, though, of course, that's too generous a term, from traditional sources. It's not merely the case that he was inspired by folk music. He outright commandeered melodies, lyrics, and arrangements, often without acknowledgement, let alone gratitude. It would be farcical, were it not so galling, that this man, who traded on the aura of authenticity, owes so much of his success to the meticulous curation of others. The irony, of course, is that Dylan's celebrity status, his transformation into a cultural icon, is precisely what has obscured the contributions of those who came before him. His admirers, largely oblivious to the history of the music they claim to cherish, have become infatuated with a figurehead, rather than the folk traditions he plundered. If they truly valued the music of the people, they would spend less time fawning over the nasal posturing of Dylan, and more time honouring the unglamorous bearded hillbillies and unsung custodians of tradition who kept these songs alive. It is perhaps a tragic inevitability that Dylan's rise coincided with the commodification of folk music in the 1960s. The Greenwich Village scene, with its faux radical pretensions and endless appetite for the authentic, served as the perfect backdrop for an artist like Dylan, whose talents for myth-making often eclipsed his actual contributions. That Gene Ritchie had to sue him to reclaim a shred of credit for her family's heritage speaks volumes about the asymmetry between Dylan's public persona and his private methods. What is left, then, for those who continue to venerate Dylan? Surely they might consider the ethical imperative of revisiting the true origins of the music they so ardently adore. Gene Ritchie, and countless others like her, deserve to be remembered not merely as footnotes in the Dylan mythos, but as essential voices in their own right. In acknowledging their contributions, we might finally begin to see Dylan not as a paragon of originality, but as what he so often was: a clever opportunist, skilled at profiting from the labor of those who had neither his ambition nor his appetite for fame.